My name is Goranka Vukolich, and I would like to welcome you all to our afternoon. Welcome to everyone from familiar faces from this morning's conversation and to some new faces for this afternoon's conversation. I am one of the co-chairs of the CYPT. I identify as she and her. I'm a white immigrant woman living and working in the region of Waterloo, and very honored to be a part of this wonderful group of individuals. I'd like to open the platform to my co-chair to say hello and introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Goranka. I'm Barb Cardo, and I'm Goranka's co-chair for the Children and Youth Planning Table. During my day job is working at the region of Waterloo as a director of the Children's Services Division, and I identify as she, her, and I too am a white settler on Turtle Island. So great to see you all today.
Thanks, Barb. And thanks for reminding me that I also have a day job that I've seemed to have forgotten in the moment. I'm the Executive Dean of Community Services at Conestoga College here. We are so excited to be here today with all of you in this virtual space as we connect with each other and connect with the ideas and the thoughts and the work that we have held over the last several years as we deepen our understanding and appreciation of what it means to belong, of the concept of belonging at a collective conceptual level, and what it means to each and every one of us organizationally and individually. We are excited to have done some work in this regard and to share that work with you and to hear from each of you about your work when it comes to belonging. Before we move forward, Barb, can I please invite you to offer the land acknowledgement for this afternoon?
Thank you very much, Goranka, for that. Yes, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement, highlighting that Waterloo region is part of the Haldeman Tract, which does encompass 6 miles on either side of the Grand River from the mouth of the Dundalk, near Dundalk, to where it empties into Lake Erie at Port Maitland, also referred to as the One Dish, One Spoon Treaty Territory. This is land that's traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. Reconciliation with our Indigenous partners requires mindful reflection each and every day in the work we do to serve this community as we collaborate with our peers and our community partners. As leaders of our various organizations and roles, it's particularly incumbent on each of us to demonstrate this commitment by seeking knowledge and relearning the histories and experiences of our Indigenous partners so that we can better serve all communities within Waterloo region. So as we gather here today, I do invite you to reflect and acknowledge the enduring presence and the deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous peoples with whom we share this land today. And I have a little, personal thought about this from our morning session. For those of you who were with us, I think you will definitely agree, but when we first, we're much earlier in our journeys together, understanding truth and reconciliation, we would read the land acknowledgement and try to bring, meaning and make, build it into our time together. But what I saw happen this morning, and we still have a long way to go, was the discussion of the contributions of Indigenous people across Canada was threaded throughout our discussions throughout the whole morning. And I just thought to myself, wow, this is, we are taking those baby steps. We are moving along our continuum. And I look forward to that continuing to be part of our, our consciousness that we are all here together. We all belong. We have so much to learn from each other. And, you know, what an amazing opportunity we each have as individuals to grow and learn together in this truth. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Barb. I have to remember to unmute myself in this new space that we are all working from. I have the pleasure today of introducing our speakers for the afternoon. But before I do that, thank you, Allison. We have some logistics that we often get so excited about our agenda that we forget about. So do really invite you to please mute yourself while we are speaking, and especially when our speakers are speaking. We invite you to rename yourself with your name and your organization, if you have one, to tag and share about us and tweet about, share about our work and what we're doing right now through social media. And there's a hashtag for you. We will be inviting all of you to contribute through our chat function and to participate in a variety of different interactive yet virtual ways. So please, we hope that you will participate in that as well. We have, I think, about 60 people joining us today. So do invite our familiar folks who are not new to us to say hello to all of us, and say hello to folks that they chat with often. And those of you who are new, please identify yourself as well. Say hello to us, wave a hand, virtual or real, and we'd love to kind of highlight you and welcome you especially to this conversation. Our three speakers today are Sharmalene, Fidelia, and Allison. I think Fidelia and Allison, you all hopefully all know, members of the CYPT. They are members of our backbone team and are active in a lot of the work that we do. And they will be providing us, especially with an overview of the snapshot data presented today. Sharmalene Mendis-Millard is new to us. So Sharmalene, welcome. She will round out the session by walking us through the importance of disaggregated data, especially as it pertains to the Youth Impact Survey, in the hope that members of our community will use these data through an equity-focused lens to help improve and inform our decision-making. Sharmalene is the Senior Manager of Research Partnerships and Evaluation at the University of Waterloo's Partners in Action Collective, and she co-chairs the International Cultural Research Network. She's very passionate about the not-for-profit sector and building community, and is currently on the board of Reep Green Solutions after having previously been a staff member there as well. She's a mixed methods geographer by training, and Sharmalene has worked for several interdisciplinary research centers that focus on advancing community well-being and social justice through community partnerships, program evaluations, and learning opportunities. We're excited to have her expertise with us today. While she was at Laurier, she ran the Program Evaluation Certificate and Summer Institute of Research Methods, and there she developed an applied research agenda on equitable approaches to evaluation. And at We All Count, founded by Heather Krause, she promoted data equity. Sharmalene coached not-for-profits on how to collect and store social identity data and other ways to think about and embed equity in data projects. We in the social work area tend to focus so much on people and relationships, and those are the cornerstones of the work that we do. But data can be our friend, and I think that we are learning more and more about how to use data effectively and influentially through our own decision making. So welcome to Sharmalene, to Fidelia and Allison as they walk us through the next couple of hours. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fidelia Okweje, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a little bit nervous. I don't know if you can tell, but like we learned this morning from Dr. Jane Clinton, it's good stress. And today I'm just excited to share with you some information from our Youth Impact Survey. So I think that's all part of where the nervousness is coming from, because I know it's good information. So what are we here today to talk about? We're here to talk about our Youth Impact Survey. And I'll be doing an overview of the 8 snapshots from the survey, 6 of which have been released, and they are the snapshots on geography, age, gender, experiences of discrimination due to sexual orientation, long-term physical and mental condition, experiences of homelessness, and the last 2, which are in the process of being released, are the experiences of youth not born in Canada, and lastly, the snapshot on racial identity, after which we'll be doing some reflection and closing. So let's jump right into today's session. So the Youth Impact Survey is our chance to hear from children and youth ages 9 to 8 to share with adults and decision makers what life actually is for young people in Waterloo region, and how we can work together to use this data to improve well-being. And so for the Youth Impact Survey, of course, we had over 60 questions with over 165 data points. This data has been collected, and we disaggregated it and have released several snapshots. Again, we're going to be talking about the snapshots. Well, pretty much, that's what the Youth Impact Survey is. We will learn more as we proceed. Again, we heard from over 1,000 youth, and the questions were centered around the 9 domains of well-being. And these questions covered areas such as gender identity, the geography, the country of birth, again, talking about long-term physical condition, racial identity, all of our questions and the data points covered all of those areas. But I want to point out something before I proceed with sharing this information, that it is important that we remember that the data that I'm presenting today only reflects the responses from the children and youth who filled out the survey. While we are excited to have received these responses, we also recognize that our survey does not capture the experiences and inputs of all children and youth in Waterloo region. Given this limitation, please consider the results from our survey as an important starting point in better understanding the diverse needs of children and youth in Waterloo region. The data points that we have included in our snapshots were prioritized based on conversations we had with young people and with our CYPT membership. We also focused on data that through statistical testing suggested that there are notable differences between subgroups in our survey. So while the breakdown of the data in this brief is based on municipality that the respondents have indicated, please bear in mind that there are other identity-based factors that contribute to the findings that we are seeing. Lastly, please consider how systemic and structural and systemic inequities contribute to what we are seeing in our findings. So when I'm presenting, remember that children and youth have experienced significant barriers and challenges due to COVID-19. And based on community research, we know that experiences of well-being can vary between subgroups, and that barrier continues to exist for members of our community. Please take care of yourself. The presentation will highlight data related to mental health, experiences of discrimination, experiences of homelessness, and areas that impact child and youth well-being. You may find some of the content that I will share today would remind some of you of challenging personal experiences. So we encourage you to please prioritize your well-being when reviewing this information. Please, again, take care of yourself. And with that being said, I'm going to jump into the very first snapshot, which is the snapshot on geography. So just as a reminder, we had children and youth from ages 9 to 18 complete this survey. And almost from what we're seeing, if we look at the breakdown, we see almost 9 in 10 of our respondents said that they live in one of the 3 cities, which is Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge, while 11.4 live in one of the 4 townships. So in terms of sense of well-being, 64.1% of our respondents said that they felt a very strong or somewhat strong sense of belonging to our community. However, after disaggregating the data, we see a 19.3 percentage point difference between respondents from the townships, where we're seeing 73.8% in comparison to respondents from Cambridge, where we see a lower ranking of 54.5%. In terms of self-assessed mental health, our respondents were generally split between describing their mental health as more negative or positive. Across the 4 communities, respondents from Cambridge and Kitchener described their mental health as generally less positive compared to those from Waterloo, and even less so compared to respondents from townships. On average, respondents from the township, respondents from the township were 14.1% points more likely to express that they have a more positive perception of their mental health compared to respondents from Kitchener. In terms of physical health, there's a region-wide, we see a region-wide response of 81% of our youth describing their physical health as positive, with slight differences across communities. The largest difference that we see was from respondents from Waterloo, from Waterloo and the township, and from those from Cambridge. So when we look at Waterloo, we see 85% of our respondents from, we got 85% of our respondents from Waterloo saying that their physical health is positive, while from the township, we're seeing 84.5% say that the physical health is positive. So in other words, we're seeing like a 10 percentage point less from our Cambridge residents when in terms of how they describe their physical health as being more positive compared to respondents from Waterloo or from the township. Now, when we look at housing insecurity, 8.1 of our respondents have indicated that they have experienced either explicit or hidden homelessness. In comparison to respondents from the township or from Waterloo, respondents from Cambridge and Kitchener were 5 to 7% point less likely to indicate that they have experienced hidden homelessness. In the Youth Impact Survey, hidden homelessness refers to having lived temporarily with family or friends in their car or anywhere else because they had nowhere else to stay. Now, when thinking about the quality of natural environment in the neighborhood, almost 3/4 of our youth respondents indicated that the quality was high. Likewise, 76% of the respondents felt that there were plenty of opportunities to enjoy nature in their neighborhood. We see some differences in this data when we disaggregated them between the 4 geographic communities. So for example, 6.1% of Cambridge respondents agreed that the quality of the natural environment in their neighborhood was high in comparison to 84.5% of respondents from the township. This means that Cambridge respondents were 23.4% point less likely to report that the quality of the natural environment in their neighborhood is high. In comparison also is respondents from the township, where there is a 17% point difference compared to those from the Kitchener respondents. And now we're going to jump into our age snapshot. So there was quite a large sample across all of our, the ranges, but when we look at the breakdown of respondents, it shows that almost half of our respondents were between the ages of 13 and 5. About 3 in 10 of respondents were between the ages of 16 and 18, and just over 2 in 10 were between the ages of 9 and 10. When we look at sense of belonging for this age group, in terms of our snapshot, this particular snapshot, again, just a reminder that 64.1% of our respondents said that they felt a strong or somewhat strong sense of belonging to the community. However, when we disaggregated the data by age, we see a 32.1 percentage point difference between youths ages 9 to 12 who appear to have a higher sense of belonging to the community compared to youth ages 16 to 18 years old, who appear to have the lowest ranking, where we see 50.3%. In terms of self-assessed mental health, respondents from our survey were generally split between describing their mental health as more negative or positive. Again, we see a decrease in positive indication of self-perceived mental health as youth grow older. On average, 9 to 12 years old respondents were 31.8 percentage points more likely to express that they have a more positive perception of their mental health compared to those around the ages 16 to 18 years. And we see a 15.6 percentage point difference more for those ages 13 to 15 years. Now, in terms of self-assessed physical health, as a reminder, 81% of our total youth respondents describe their physical health as more positive. Now, while majority of the respondents across the age group describe their physical health as generally positive, there were slight differences across these groups. The largest difference we see is 23.4 percentage points, which was between our youth ages 9 to 12 years old and 16 to 18 years old, where we're seeing 68.7% of that age group agreeing that their physical health is positive. Now let's look into experiences of discrimination. 41.5% of our youth respondents said that they experienced discrimination due to some physical characteristics, such as the physical appearance, their sex, age, or race. Now, 12.4% of respondents indicated that they were discriminated specifically because of their age. Across the three age groups, there was a slightly higher percentage of 16 to 18 years old who indicated this form of discrimination. That's where we see a 12.6 percentage point difference in comparison to youth ages 9 to 12 years of age. Now, when we look at coping with stress in school, our youth respondents were asked to reflect on their overall experience throughout the 2020 and 2021 school year, which for many of them meant a mix of online and in-person learning. Over 1/3 said that they had more schoolwork than they could handle. So taking a closer look, we see almost half youth ages 16 to 18 years old agree to this statement, whereas about a quarter of youth from ages 9 to 12 years old agree to that statement. In other words, our youth within the from ages 16 to 8 were 20.5 percentage points more likely to agree that more likely to express that they're having more schoolwork than they can handle. So we asked questions around environment, and in total, 57.1% of our respondents agree that the quality of recreation and cultural facilities in their neighborhood was very high. However, our youth respondents from ages 16 to 18 years old were 13.7 percentage point less likely to agree to this statement when we compare the data to youth ages 9 to 12 years old. And at this point, we're going to pause and reflect on what we've seen from the first two snapshots. I'll pass this over to Alison and Sharmalene to just tell us what's coming to mind.
Thanks, Fidelia. There's lots to go through here, and hopefully folks are coming in today with some level of awareness of this data. It's a lot to digest, so take what you can in this time. But I'll just share the conversations that I witnessed starting to open up as these snapshots were released. I often had a chance maybe to interact with media around this, or to give presentations to councils, for example. The geography snapshot, so our out of the gate snapshot, was great learning for all of us. Super high interest from our municipal partners on this one. They seem to really appreciate that they could see more up close the experiences of young people in their community. In fact, they wanted even deeper level of data if possible. So for example, Fidelia shared with us about, the quality of their environments. People wanted to know, well, which parts of Kitchener are people reflecting on this, or which township areas are we talking about? So we talked about the value of continuing to have more and more voices and growing diversity in voices that are sharing, which can open the door for more disaggregation down to finer geographic levels. I also noticed how quickly the media really grabbed onto a comparative narrative at the geography level. So you notice that there's some trending where Cambridge is maybe standing out as the young people who were part of this survey, their well-being is maybe not looking as favorable, and the townships look more favorable. So it was very interesting to watch the media dig into this and spin the stories that they were intent to spin. Loved our partners who were able to come forward and speak from their perspective as folks who work and serve in these communities. And I think the point I kept emphasizing with people is, we're talking in the geographic snapshot, we're talking about 11 data points out of over 100 where there was notable differences. And the story that is also important to keep in mind is that the trending and the concerning data from young people is pervasive across all areas of our community. So that's something I'll offer on the geographic. The age snapshot, I do think it's interesting how consistent that patterning is as the young people are aging, where we see kind of like the dial shifting. And I noticed the conversation that opened up there was around developmental appropriateness or developmental expectations. So folks were very interested, I noticed, in talking about, in what ways does this almost confirm what we would expect to see as young people are aging? Like, where do we see dynamic shift within families, within peer groups, within schools, and within identity of self? So it's, I think that's been interesting for people to reflect on and think about, in what ways does it invite the next level of conversation. Sharmalene, did you want to throw in anything right now?
Sure, just thank you so much, Fidelia, and to everyone in the chat. I do think that, this is just such a rich body of data to build upon and learn from, and that it is that first step of disaggregation, meaning that instead of seeing all youth or even the population in general as a homogeneous blob, we are breaking apart data in different ways. And so there are so many ways you can splice and dice these things and look at how people are feeling, their outcomes, etc., for decision making or for improving programs. And so I think this is a wonderful first step at grappling with how you even collect these data, who gets to decide what questions are asked and how, who makes meaning. And I hope that all of you can stay tuned for this afternoon, where Joanna and team will talk about actually engaging youth in the whole process and making meaning, sharing power in that way. To me, equity is about power relations, being transparent, not necessarily always being able to share power equally, but just being able to acknowledge past and present harms and inequities in terms of who has access and ownership of data. Speaking of which, just before we continue, I do want to acknowledge the fantastic work of the First Nations Information Governance Center and their training on OCAP, ownership, control, access, and possession of data. We're all on Turtle Island, Indigenous land, First Nations land, and so you know, I know that we're all maybe bound by certain data sharing agreements or, you know, there's different levels of access to data, but I just want to also always keep in mind that these data are First Nations Indigenous data. So all of us here and about our lands. So how do we provide that, how do we enact those principles in our real world? And I think being able to support initiatives like this, where there are efforts to share the results in different ways, is one aspect of that. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alison and Sharmalene. All right, so we're just going to jump right into the next snapshot, which is the gender snapshot. So respondents in our survey were able to share the gender they the most identify with, an open-ended question. So in our survey, gender was described as referring to the gender identity that they currently feel. It may be different from the sex that they were assigned at birth, and may be different from what is indicated on legal documents. So when we look at the breakdown, in total, 62.8% of respondents identified as a girl, almost double the number of boy identifying respondents. Another 4.5% describe themselves as either non-binary or another gender identity. The last category includes identities such as gender fluid, genderqueer, and transgender. So in terms of sense of belonging, when we disaggregated our data, we see that those identifying as a boy or girl reported almost identical levels of a strong sense of belonging. Respondents with a gender identity other than a boy or girl had a strong or very strong, sorry, I'll take that back. When we disaggregated the data, we see that those identifying as boys or girl identified, you know, similar levels of strong sense of belonging. However, only 26.8% of respondents with a gender identity other than boy or girl had a strong or somewhat strong sense of belonging, making it a 39 percentage point difference in comparison to the other groups. When we look at self-assessed mental health, 67.8% of respondents identifying as a boy indicated that their mental health was more positive, whereas 51.7% of those identifying as a girl shared the same sentiment, a 16.1 percentage point difference. Respondents with a gender identity other than boy or girl were the least likely to indicate that their mental health was positive. This is a 50.7 percentage points lower in comparison to their peers who identified as boy or a girl. So I just wanted that to really sink in. Apologies, it's a 34.6 percentage points difference. I wanted that to really sink in. Experiences of discrimination, 7.1% of our respondents indicated that they were discriminated against, specifically because of their gender identity. However, in comparison to the groups identifying with a gender identity other than a boy or girl, reporting discrimination due to gender identity, over 14 times more than those identifying as boy or a girl. So again, just wanting that to really sink in. I will move into the next snapshot on experiences of discrimination due to one's sexual orientation. So I wanted to point out that a major limitation of the 2021 survey was that there wasn't a direct question asking respondents about their sexual orientation. So as an alternative way to understand the experiences of those who identify with a sexual orientation other than heterosexual. We analyzed the experiences of those who indicated experiences of discrimination over the past year because of their sexual orientation. So the breakdown, in total, almost 1 in 10 respondents identified experiencing discrimination due to their sexual orientation, compared to 90.7 who indicated that they didn't experience discrimination due to their sexual orientation. So when we look at sense of belonging, after disaggregating our data, only about 1/3 of our respondents with experiences due to sexual orientation said that they felt a strong or somewhat strong sense of belonging, in comparison to 2/3 of their peers, making it a 31.5% points difference. When we look in terms of self-assessed mental health, about 6 in 10 of those with no experience due to sexual orientation describe their mental health as more positive. However, when we look at youth with experiences of discrimination due to sexual orientation, about 1 in 10 describe their mental health as more positive. That is a 49.5% point difference. In terms of self-assessed physical health, youth with no experiences of discrimination due to sexual orientation were more likely to describe their physical health as positive, in comparison to youth with experiences of discrimination due to their sexual orientation, where we see a 17.5% point difference. Now let's look at discrimination itself. Again, just a reminder, 41.5% of our respondents said that they experienced discrimination due to some personal characteristics, right? Due to physical appearance, sex, age, or race. However, 21.6% of our respondents indicated that they were discriminated against because of their physical appearance. However, respondents with experiences of discrimination due to sexual orientation were 3 times more likely to experience discrimination due to their physical appearance in comparison to their peers, making it a 41.4% points difference. So I'm going to take a pause here again and just let us talk about what we've seen so far, and I'll pass it on to Alison and Sharmalene again.
This one calls us to breathe, right? Through this. I think the term that I maybe heard most often in chatting with people about the release was like gut punch, shocking, like people had a visceral, I think, response to this data. Not surprising, I would want to, qualify to folks who are well aware of the mental health experiences and belonging experiences. And at the same time, I think it is quite striking, the differences that we're seeing in this data for the mental health figures and the belonging figures in particular. Fidelia did flag that we noticed a major limitation of last year's tool in that it doesn't ask outright about sexual orientation. And so we did use the proxy. So it's of course not as ideal as it would have been if we had the question itself. But I did also want to note, in terms of asking about gender, the young people in our community, after in the 2020 version, asking it as a closed option, checkbox style, we got a lot of feedback from young people about their desire to see this as an open-ended question, the gender identity question, and continued. And so that's how it was asked in 2021. And it is more work on the back end. And we continued to get a ton of positive feedback from young people of how much they appreciated the way in which that question was asked. Sharmalene?
Thank you. Yeah, to pick up on your last point there, closed versus open-ended questions. One thing that I learned through my time working at We All Count, which offers training on embedding equity into your data projects and the choices that are made all along. The thing that I hadn't thought of before that was that when you ask an open question, absolutely, yes, the response, it leaves the person to respond in the way that they identify with the most. The thing that is hidden sometimes is that at the back end, the analysts then have the power to categorize, to interpret, to group terms together. And so one way to deal with that is to have as many categories as possible that are generated by people, and have other, not other, please don't ever use other. I keep saying other because it was my training, but we don't want to other people. You can say an identity that you describe or whatever it is. But what I'm trying to say is that to be a good practice would be to be transparent about the types of categories that the individual responses might be grouped into, so that people are choosing which category they're being grouped into if the aggregation is needed, if you see what I mean. So yes, absolutely, we all are unique individuals. We all identify in different ways, culturally, personally, spiritually. The social identity piece is how we are seen in society, within that societal worldview, and to one another. So it is a relationship. Garanka, you were talking about this work is all about relationship. I would say our lives and our work, whatever field you're in, is all about relationship. Data is a relationship. It's a sharing of ourselves, and trusting in the people we're sharing with to value and hold and use those data in valuable ways. So it is a relationship. And so the process that you've all gone through to do this survey and to improve it over time, and again, I invite you to this afternoon session, is an example of building relationships and sharing power and valuing difference in order to understand our youth and our children in one way, to be able to serve them better and to uplift them and help them achieve their potential in the ways that they want to. So I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I do want to also just say that data are not objective. And so there are values embedded in them. We do often use social identity data as proxies for the questions that are actually asked here. So what I appreciate about the survey a lot is that you're not only asking about demographics, but you're asking about people's experiences and linking those together. Being very specific about the language that you're using to say, we are asking, people indicated this specific thing. That's very helpful, right? We're not trying to conflate the results to say more than they are. And to remember that quantitative data is just this type of thing is one piece, and then we can complement that with other forms of knowledge and experience and wisdom, qualitative, interviews, focus groups, talking with people. We get more depth and richness, and get to more of who we are at a certain specific point in time, and what our experiences are in it. So it's so important to believe people when they share something, and it's not, like Fidelia was saying, not representative of everyone, and even quantitative data that tries to be generalizable, we know that there are limitations there. So it's one snapshot, which is what I love about this. It's a snapshot, and as Allison, you've said to me in the past, it's like flashing a light on where we want to explore further. So I really appreciate that. And the last thing I wanted to say is that I feel like this work is important towards equity in that we are recognizing that there are differences and nuances. And so this is a step towards an intersectional analysis where you can combine, let's say, okay, fine in Cambridge, what populations within Cambridge, or what are the aspects of people within Cambridge and the social determinants of health that are creating conditions for those youth. What are those? This is where this can go. So being careful along the way, and I appreciate your approach to that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharmalene. That's great.
Fidelia, I'm just gonna, if I could just jump in, Sharmalene, I just want to thank you so much as you're helping us unpack the meaning behind some of these numbers, because really that's what they are, right? And data are numbers and they tell a story. So thank you for reminding us that the story is not an absolute story. And thank you for reminding us that the data are static as well. And, yeah, that's really important, I think, as we interpret some of these numbers for us as a community. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And over time, then you'll be able to see trends.
Yeah, absolutely.
Recognizing the limits. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sharmalene. Thank you very much, Garanka. So I'm going to run through again the next two before we take a pause. The snapshot that we're going to be talking about now is the long-term and physical mental condition snapshot. So to better understand the experiences of those who identify as having a disability, we analyzed the experiences of those who indicated having a long-term physical or mental condition that impacts the ability to fully participate in community, school, work, and other activities. And in total, 87.7% of respondents identified as not having a long-term condition, whereas 12.3% of respondents indicated that they did. So when we looked at sense of belonging for this group, after disaggregating our data, we see that only about a third of respondents who identified as having a long-term mental or physical condition, a long-term physical or mental condition, had a somewhat strong sense of belonging, in contrast to 2/3 of respondents who identified that they didn't have any of these conditions. So that is a 30.7% point difference between these two groups. In terms of coping with stress, over 1/3 of our respondents said that they had more schoolwork that they could handle. But looking more closely, those identifying as having a long-term physical or mental condition were more likely to indicate that they have more schoolwork that they could handle than their peers, representing a 24.2% point difference. In terms of self-assessed mental health, our youth respondents identifying as having long-term physical and mental condition were almost 3 times less likely to describe their mental health as more positive in comparison to their peers. From our screen, if you do the math, you see a 36.1% point difference. So in terms of self-assessed physical health, while majority of our respondents, agree that their physical health is positive, those who identify as having a long-term physical or mental condition were 14.1% point less likely to assess their physical health as more positive. Looking at experiences of discrimination, 5.8% of our survey respondents indicated that they were discriminated against because of a disability. Youth identifying as having a long-term physical or mental condition were 32.4% point more likely than their peers to express this form of discrimination. I just wanted that number to sink in again before we jump into the next snapshot. So the next snapshot that we'll be looking at is the one on experiences of homelessness. So almost 1 in 10 respondents had experienced either explicit or hidden homelessness. All respondents who had experienced homelessness also had experienced with hidden homelessness. When we disaggregated our data, we see that less than half of our respondents who identified having experiences of homelessness had a strong or a somewhat strong sense of belonging, in contrast to almost 2/3 of respondents who haven't had any experience of homelessness. That's representing a 17.4% point difference. In terms of self-assessed mental health, youth identifying as having experiences of homelessness were less likely to describe their mental health as more positive in comparison to their peers, representing a 15.9% points difference. When we look at the assessment of physical health, again, while a majority of our respondents have expressed or described their physical health as more positive, those with experiences of homelessness were 17.9% point less likely to agree with their peers that their physical health was more positive. So we're going to, again, just reflect and talk about what we're seeing in terms regarding these two last snapshots.
So one piece that I don't think we had a chance to clarify at the start of today's conversation is in 2021, our community, Waterloo region, was one of 4 communities in Canada that had the chance to do this surveying with young people. This tool is actually a UNICEF Canada tool. Hello to our UNICEF friends who are on the call today. And the Canadian Institute of Wellbeing at the U of W locally was actually the data partner that partnered with the 4 communities and handled the data and analyzed the data. And it was a great experience to be together in that group of 4 communities, learning and troubleshooting things together. And I remember when we first came together to hear them feedback a bit to us about the data, the first thing that they were noticing across all communities was the experiences of young people who had long-term physical and or mental conditions. They gave sort of that early sounding the alarm of saying, we're seeing some really notable well-being differences across all of your communities for young people with these experiences. And definitely as we got into the data, you see that playing out. With the experiences of homelessness, one thing that I think kind of dominated in this conversation, that the conversations I at least heard and were part of, was the prevalence, like the people noticing, wow, almost 1 in 10 of these survey respondents have had some experiences of homelessness. Particularly, again, CIW, who handles a lot of data all the time, saying, while we have a very diverse cross-section of young people who participated in the 2021 survey, it does skew more affluent. So even within a sampling of a more affluent group of individuals, to see 1 in 10 with experiences of homelessness is quite notable. Also, this is data that was collected in May of 2021. And so again, something to take note of as we think about what the last few months has brought for our community in terms of housing instability and housing needs. I'm imagining that number is even higher. So grateful to the individuals who shared their voices with us so that we have an opportunity to share their stories.
Yeah, I think the fact that so many people were willing to talk and share is a testament to the process, but also recognizing that when people do not feel like sharing, that's okay too, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the process wasn't working for them. They might just, for whatever reason, might not wanted to have shared at that point, which makes me remember to say that we always have missing data as well. So it's not like we'll always have a complete data set. And so it's important to tease that out as well, to say, okay, out of all of the respondents we had, these are the people that there's this percentage that didn't give an answer at all or preferred not to say. What I also like about these snapshots and the way that this was constructed is that it is a type of intersectional analysis where you are trying to see the correlation between the people who experience long-term health conditions and their experiences of discrimination. And, there's so many examples here. I see that this type of data set is so valuable to complement census data that only give us, they give us something else, right? And so this is great to have a community level data set for us to work with, to sometimes, like you were saying, Allison, to validate what we already have guessed or know about, and then also to point us in directions that we weren't expecting. But overall, being able to normalize and make it the norm to integrate these considerations into decision making, and to say, yes, we recognize value, you are counted, you are seen, is a positive of this kind of initiative. So yeah, thank you. I'm wondering if what people are thinking about in the chat. Yes, any data, all data are not perfect. So it's really, we can go down a rabbit hole, so many rabbit holes of trying to understand how exactly to determine something. So we want to understand something for a specific goal. And we have a method, and then there are so many methodological nuances and limitations and benefits. Brian, yes, please.
Thanks, Sharmalene. And yeah, good to see you and see a lot of familiar faces. Due to bandwidth concerns, I have my camera off, so apologies for that. I'm going back to something I think Sarah had flagged way earlier in the slide deck in regards to the 16% of youth who I think were reporting discrimination. And as that compared with, and I can't remember the specifics of the younger groups, there was 2 other data points. I think it was like 9 to 10 and then 12-ish or something. Anyways, they were reporting, I think, experiences of around 3-4%. So that's a huge difference between the two, like between the 15, 16-year-olds and then the younger group. And I'm just wondering what that, I mean, there's lots of possibilities as to what that might mean. Is it that the younger crowd does not have the language to talk about their experiences? Is it that they are not having those experiences? I have my doubts that would be the case. Is it that the 16-year-olds are just better able to express themselves? And probably most concerning, is it that the younger crowd is just internalizing everything and are holding that back and not sharing? So that's especially concerning. And and Sarah was interested in that as well. So I'd be curious to hear their perspective on that as well.
Yeah, that's a really, these are all really great points. These numbers indicate, that's why we call them indicators. Also, even when we ask them in this way, it's still indicating something. And these are the measures that we're using. So it's absolutely, there are stories. We don't necessarily know exactly why somebody answered the way they did or chose not to. Sarah, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I did really quickly. I think maybe just to help give this group maybe a little more perspective, I can share a personal experience as someone, I think, closer to this age range of the data that's coming through. I'm not that far away from where I was at 18. I'm 25 currently. However, through my experiences, especially identifying so heavily with that 16% that experiences discrimination, I don't necessarily think it's that we, or I say we because youth, I don't think that we are internalizing things more as much as it's more important to turn it inwards with self again, which is kind of touching on what people who attended the morning session may recall. We touched on that a bit, turning things inward and looking at yourself, which I think still translates over into this data because looking at my experiences at that age, I was often shut down by adults and people who were paid to be educators when unfortunately, in my reality, they were paid to be harmful to me. So I think that's also something to look at and something to consider when looking at this data. When youth are expressing, maybe it's not necessarily them lacking the words, maybe it's us as adults lacking that attention and wanting to actually just sit down and listen.
Thank you, Sarah. You're talking about the importance too of having those one-on-one relationships and conversations that can complement these types of surveys. It's like it's not quite like it, but it's that like the story of the elephant, where if we're all looking at close up at different parts of the elephant, hopefully not smelling different parts of the elephant, but we're sensing different parts of the elephant, and we are trying to understand what this is. We'll never get the complete picture that the elephant knows of itself. So yeah, I really appreciate that, Sarah. Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment on that?
All right, if we have no one responding, I'll jump right in. I want to say thank you to Brian, Sarah, and Sharmalene once again for sharing, sharing what you just shared. Very powerful insights. Just to also share that, because we also understand that we want to just to better understand the minds of our youth. We also had lots of sense-making sessions to understand some of this data that we're seeing. And in the next presentation at 3 p.m., we will be taking you guys on that journey as to what we heard from our youth in terms of this data that we're seeing and how all of that feedback was put into the data in action report, which will be launched at 3 p.m. So again, it's a time for you to really to get more context to the numbers that we're seeing. So thank you, Sarah, for pointing that out. So the last two snapshots that I will be talking about are yet to be released. So this presentation is more like a teaser for you to kind of have a sense of what's coming out. And our hope is that with this information, you'll be more curious and you look forward to the release of the last two snapshots. So I'll jump right into the experiences of those not born in Canada, which our hope is that it will be released by the end of the week or next week. So our respondents were able to select if they were born in Canada or not. Of the youth who responded to this question, 86.2% said that they were born in Canada, whereas 13.9% said that they were not. Of those who were born outside Canada, an average said they lived in Canada for 8.2 years. Almost 6 out of 10 selected that they were Canadian citizens, and Canadian citizens when completing the survey, whereas 35.2 selected that they were not, and 6.3 selected that they did not know for sure or were unsure. So when we did further breakdown, more than 40 countries were chosen by respondents when asked to identify the country they were born in. Unfortunately, due to the small number of respondents distributed across these countries, in some cases we saw only 1 or 2 respondents who were unable to disaggregate this data even further across countries or region. However, the top of the countries that we see is United States of America, India, China, Pakistan, Eritrea, and and we also asked questions around the number of years that our youth have been in the country. So 12.8 indicated that they've been in the country for 2 years or less, 20.8 indicated that they've been in the country for 3 to 5 years, 36% said they've been here 6 to 10 years, and 30.4 have lived in Canada for more than 10 years. So when we look at sense of belonging, upon disaggregating our data, we see only a small difference in percentage between those born in Canada versus those not born in Canada. In both cases, close to 2/3 of respondents felt a strong or somewhat strong sense of belonging to the community. In terms of self-assessed mental health, those who were not born in Canada were more likely to describe their mental health as positive when compared to their peers. We see a 14-point difference. So I wanted that to sink in. Also, children and youth who identified as not born in Canada were also less likely than their peers to have a diagnosed anxiety disorder, e.g. a phobia, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder. We're seeing a 9.7% points difference. In terms of housing insecurity, almost 1 in 10 of our respondents had experienced either homelessness or hidden homelessness. When asked about experiences of homelessness, children and youth who indicated being born outside of Canada were more likely than their peers to have temporarily lived with family or friends in a car or anywhere else because they had nowhere else to live. We see a 10.6% point difference from those not born in Canada and those born in Canada. In terms of the environment around us, when thinking about the quality of natural environment in their neighborhood, almost 3/4 of our total youth respondents indicated that the quality was very high. Between the two groups of those born in Canada and not born in Canada, those identifying as not born in Canada were 9.9% points less likely to agree with this statement. Also, youth born outside Canada were 14.6% point less likely to agree that the quality of the creation and cultural facilities in their neighborhood was high. And the last snapshot for the day is the one on racial and identity snapshot. Again, we're hoping to release this before the end of the year. So our youth respondents were able to select the races that they identify with the most. So when we look at the chart, 63% of our respondents identified as white, 2.3 identified as indigenous, 2.5 as Latino, South Asian, 3.2, Middle Eastern, 4.6%, Black, 5.3, East Asian, 5.5, South Asian, 8.9, and another race we see that identified as 4.7. Now, other racial identities which we termed another race were respondents identified with at least, so this race was named by at least 2 youth, including biracial or mixed. And some other nationalities represented there are Guyanese, Indo-Caribbean, and North African. So please note that due to small sample size, the indigenous data was not broken down further. So I just wanted to point that out as we take a deeper dive into the data. So in terms of sense of belonging, after disaggregating our data, we see that our white respondents, Middle Eastern, East Asian, Black, and another race reported a similar, stronger sense of belonging to the community. Southeast Asian and Latino respondents reported lower levels of sense of belonging to their community at 5.1 and 48% respectively. When compared to our white youth respondents, there is an 11.6 and 16.7% point difference respectively. Looking at experiences of discrimination, I want to point out that our focus should be on the orange part of the chart, because that's where our focus should be on the orange part of the chart, not on the blue part. In total, 41.5% of all youth respondents said that they experienced discrimination due to some personal characteristics, such as their physical appearance, sex, age, or race. More specifically, 10.5% of these respondents indicated that they were discriminated against because of their race. Black youth respondents were most likely to report discrimination because of their race, with 46.2% agreeing that they experienced racial discrimination in the past year. Following this is 29.1% of East Asian, 28.3% of Middle Eastern, 27.7% of another race, 25.5% of Southeast Asian, and 20.5% of South Asian. respondents reported experiencing racial discrimination, white and Latino respondents were least likely to agree that they've experienced discrimination because of their race. In terms of self-assessed mental health, almost 1 in 10 of our respondents reported that they had a diagnosed mood disorder, e.g. depression, bipolar disorder. Only white and another race respondents were more likely to report having a diagnosed mood disorder at 10.6 and 23.9% respectively. At 3.4, South Asian respondents were the least likely to report having a diagnosed mood disorder. Overall, 15.1% of our youth respondents reported that they have a diagnosed anxiety disorder. Example will be phobia, obsessive compulsion disorder, panic disorder. In this case, we see Middle Eastern, white, and another race respondents were more likely to report having a diagnosed anxiety disorder. Once again, we see South Asian respondents were least likely to report having a diagnosed anxiety disorder, with only 3.4% saying that they did. I'm looking at housing insecurity. 1.9% of our respondents reported experiencing homelessness. That is, again, just trying to explain what that means, is having to live in shelter, on the street, or in an abandoned building. In looking closer at the data, South Asian and white respondents were least likely to report having had experiences of homelessness at 0% and 0.8% respectively. On the other hand, Black and Latino respondents were most likely to report having had experiences of homelessness at 7.5 and 8% respectively. Now, the chart on our screen speaks to experiences of hidden homelessness, that is, having to live with family or friends in a car or anywhere else. In digging deeper into experiences of hidden homelessness, we see East Asian, white, and Southeast Asian respondents were least likely to report having had experiences of hidden homelessness. Similar to experiences of homelessness, Black and Latino respondents were most likely to report having experiences of hidden homelessness at 18.9 and 20% respectively. In terms of the quality of environment around us, 57.1% of our respondents agree that the quality of recreation and cultural facilities in their neighborhood was high. But when we took a closer look at our disaggregated data, Southeast Asian respondents were the least likely to agree with this statement at 31.3%. Following that are Black, Latino, and South Asian respondents. On the other hand, Middle Eastern respondents had the highest levels of agreement, with 57.8% agreeing that the cultural and recreational facilities in their neighborhood was high. Another race at 56.5, East Asian at 53.7, and white at 53% respondents also had higher levels of agreement to this statement. So we're going to take a pause and talk about what we've heard and seen in these last two snapshots.
Yeah, so lots that we're processing here, and these last two have, I think, offered us an opportunity to dig a little deeper before releasing the snapshots. So as folks will hopefully know, the snapshots have been released on more or less a monthly basis since the start of the year, or since, you know, the first quarter of the year. And these last two, as we would with all of our previous snapshots, when we would talk to those who were working particularly closely with the populations that were sharing the voices from, we started to notice in the racial identity and in the experiences of those born and not born in Canada, a lot of questions coming up, a lot of folks saying outright, this is not necessarily aligning with what I believe to be the case of the folks that I am supporting. I'm concerned maybe about some of the data that's coming out, and it's been really interesting to then go through a bit of a different process, which has been taking this data back first to young people. So doing some further sense making with young people to say, you know, these are the data points that are coming through, and how does that resonate for you or not? Why do you think the information might be like we're seeing, or what is surprising about it? And so when you see these 2 snapshots released in the coming weeks, they will include this layer to it, which is the young people feeding back, you know, what's their take on the data, which again, as we get more and more practiced at this disaggregation of data, I think it offers us a chance to think about, is that a practice, like where else might that practice be really meaningful? Fidelia, as someone who's been leading this work with adults and young people, I don't know if you want to comment further, or we can jump right to Sharmalene, who might have other comments.
I'll let Sharmalene go first.
Oh, I wanted you to go first. Yeah, of course, this is it is sensitive, and it can be used to double down on stereotypes and discrimination, and so yeah, I really appreciate that the extra step of sense making and complementing the data collected with other forms of data, storytelling, life experiences, interviews, focus groups, but even there are so many. You could even take art that people create and music, and those are all pieces of information. Data is just information, right? That is grounded in a way of viewing how we can even, what is truth, what is reality, what can be assessed. So when it comes to racial data, I think going back to the goals of the impact survey, thinking of why we're collecting these data, how it's going to be used, who will be using it for what purpose, is important. And of course, this is challenging when it's for a region and for so many different purposes. I get that for sure. So providing examples of, you know, maybe the next steps are providing examples and case studies and stories of how these pieces of information then can be used for the education system or the healthcare system or whatever in specific ways with the people whose data, you know, with the people we're trying to understand and serve better. And the story of complementing the data together, as well as a reminder that, okay, these data are based on, like Fidelia was saying, the people that responded at that particular time, particular ways, who there's so many factors that go into how credible or reliable our data is. I think of credible data when it comes to qualitative data. Is it credible to the people whose data this is about? And then reliability, validity, those are terms that we typically use with quantitative number data. So qualitative words, stories, songs, art. Quantitative is based on the idea that we can quantify any of this, right? So what I'm trying to say is, when we're looking at these results, maybe being reminded of how many responses those results are based on, out of how many people were asked, out of how many people we know to be living in our region, can provide some context and to help us when we're making decisions. We have to make decisions on the best information that we have available to us, that we can even process, and we each have different learning styles and different paradigms and frames of thinking, and we have to learn the jargon for our own fields. And I know that there's a lot coming at us. So this is where a community of practice and us working together with our youth and with each other to challenge ourselves, to make sense of these data and think, so the now what do we use this for? And again, I think this afternoon we'll hear what the youth are saying is the now what, so what, do something, people. That's coming. So it's a great process. I like that this is part of a process of engagement and learning about ourselves and how to do better, because we know that the systems that we operate within are failing so many of us.
All right, thank you, Sharmalene. I'm gonna jump in. I wanted to take a moment to to get myself back from the presentation, but yeah, just to add to what you've said and what Alison question Alison asked, you know, from the work that from the sense making session we had with the adults and even the youth, and I'll start with the one we had with the adults. I know when we presented this data, a lot of like how what we're seeing in the chat, like interesting, like it's some of the comments that we're hearing is just does not, it kind of doesn't like, it's not reflective of what we think or what we're seeing in, you know, what we're seeing in our like everyday life and all. But the truth is, you know, going back to these were the responses of the youth who participated in this survey. But, you know, taking a deeper dive, like I'll talk about some of the feedback we got around mental health was like, could it be, what was the state of mind in terms of how the youth were responding to mental health? We all know how like there's like cultural, how like different cultures see, interpret, and deal with mental health. Could it be that if we're saying there's like the youth not born in Canada have like the mental, like, you know, we see a higher, they're agreeing that their mental health is great. Could it be like cultural factor at play? What was the state of mind? Like even in terms of sense of belonging, like what does sense of belonging mean to children and youth not born in Canada and all of that? And even in terms of like the housing insecurity, there was questions around what does housing insecurity even mean to the youth? Because for some cultures, it's okay to live with family, especially if you're new and you're trying to settle in Canada. Some cultures, and they're okay with living communal and staying with one another. So was that the mindset of the, you know, was that what was behind the minds of youth when they were completing this survey and all? But again, going into the sense-making session with the youths themselves, we asked these same questions and pretty much got similar responses. And it's a case of, you know, there's just, I think where we're going with this is, at the end of the day, let's focus on the data and what we can best use this data to, you know, inform decision making. The youth impact survey is kind of like the information that we have right now to inform decision making, right? Rather than piecing out some things that we feel like, oh, well, this does not tie into what I think. Well, this is what the youth are saying. And I think it's we are accountable to the youth to take what they have shared with us and make good use of it. And it doesn't fall on us as adults to say, I'm going to begin to tear it apart and go by what I think or what we believe or perceive to be what our reality is. Like, I don't necessarily think that it calls for us to dwell on, oh, what's at play here? What could be driving these responses? Well, it's more for us to, you know, focus on this is what has been shared. What can we do to make meaningful change in our society? I think just what I'll share with from all of the sessions that we've had.
Yeah, thank you, Fidelia. I think we can get paralyzed by fear of not doing the right thing. And as in the right thing from whose perspective also, right? When you're trying to serve everyone, you can serve no one. So I think part of it too is just being open to the feedback and the input as these data are released and used, to listen, like Sarah was saying, and to be open to saying, okay, yes, how can we do this? The yes instead of, oh, I didn't mean to do that, or of course you didn't mean to do that. You're not bad people. Like, no, I'm not a bad person either. I of course I have good intentions. So that's not the point. It's working with what we have and being open to continually learning. I've been, I don't know, I guess I'm middle-aged now. fine, but I'm still learning. And I still am taking, I'll still take courses and I'll still learn about methods that I've used before, because there's always something to learn and always room to grow. And so I encourage us to go forth with humility and openness, and knowing that just to be transparent about what we have in front of us and the gift that is, and the limitations, what we can and cannot say we think, and to be open to conversation. I personally find data as just one way of having a conversation, and even having conversations, you know, again, in that case, we are the research instrument, if you think about it, right? And so it all depends on the relationship we have with each other. And so the quality and the amount and whatever of data that we get within that conversation, those insights, depends on that personal relationship. So there's all kinds of things to think about, but I appreciate a really solid process to follow, because we all have different personalities and ways of doing things, as being as inclusive of especially Indigenous and culturally responsive ways of doing things, I think is a great way forward. So thank you for all of your work and for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And on that note, I do want to thank everyone for their contributions, participation. Fidelia and Allison, thanks so much for presenting these data to us. And Sharmalene, thank you for your work in helping us make sense of it. You know, lots of really good information. And I think, you know, Sharmalene, thanks for reminding us that data, I mean, you know, we can look at this in so many different ways, and, you know, we can bring all of that research language and, you know, challenge the validity and the reliability, and correlation coefficients can be thrown around, and statistical analysis. But when we step back from it all, I mean, I think, you know, what we have here is a process where we have invited our young people to tell us their stories. And we have captured those stories through these data. And I think we have to recognize that, as Sharmalene has reminded us, we also bring ourselves to the interpretation of these data. Data are not objective, they're not absolute. I think this is a journey for us as a community. So let's acknowledge that. Let's be open to gathering more data, whether it's in this format or whether it's in other qualitative ways, by inviting conversations, by collecting artifacts from our young people to tell us their stories in these different ways. We will just get better at it, and we will continue to grow our data pool. So thank you, everyone. And we remind you that we are going to take a 30-minute break right now. I think we're back again at 3 o'clock. Allison, if I'm recalling, we can use the same link. And we will continue to unpack and make sense of what this means through the lens of our young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Sharmalene. Great to see you.
Great to see you, everyone. And thank you, Fidelia, for everything. And Allison, but Fidelia, great job in
Fidelia.
bringing this all together. It's very difficult.
Yeah, lots
Where's
of
my
information.
little, like, where's my, yay, it's a party.
Yeah, you need music now.
Yes, we need to
To
like
celebrate,
crank
celebratory
again.
music. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. See you
everyone.
at 3.